The Coming People by Charles F. Dole. Chapter 2. Certain Clear Facts. To a merely casual observer, the spectacle of our present modern world does not give proof that the meek or gentle have as yet won the earth. Imagine some ancient Egyptian brought to life again, shown the vast military establishments of Europe, taken to the English naval ports and shown the great destroyers. Let him hear the talk of Czar and Kaiser. Let him be told the sums raised by the taxation of the great civilized nations for the support of armies and navies. Let him traverse the regions of Asia and Africa and watch the evidences of tyrannical misrule. Let him see cities marked by the bloodstains of recent massacres and the immense ignorant and oppressed populations. He would not think that the world had got on very much since the days of the Pharaohs. Or again, if an early prophet of Israel, an Amos or Hosea, were to visit the great factory towns, were to hear the bitter complaints of the masses of working men about their straitened conditions, their insufficient wages, the greed and avarice of their employers, if he were to read the newspapers and be told the old story that the rich are growing richer and the poor are growing poorer, his soul might well be stirred within him, as when he lifted up his voice against the rapacity of the noblemen of Samaria or Jerusalem. The present world seems in fact to be controlled by the fighters, the proud, the selfish, the unjust. We need not, however, merely look at the bewildering dust, strife, and noise which mark the surface of life. But we must also consider these deeper conditions, industrial and commercial, out of which the wonderful network of our civilization is wrought. We need to look not at what kings, parliaments, and congresses are doing, but more closely at the lives of the multitudes of the humble and unpraised who weave the warp and woof of history. We need not be concerned about the stationary East, or ask how much it has changed in 1,000 years. It will be enough for our purpose if we trace profound marks of change and advancement among the peoples who lead the van of civilization. Where the leaders go, there the multitudes sooner or later must follow. We will consider some of the distinguishing characteristics of our Anglo-Saxon people, and especially the developments that have taken place within a century in the United States. We are prepared to show that in this great leading nation of the world, to which all other nations look, the signs of the incoming of the new age of the gentle and friendly race are obvious. Let us ask in several important directions what kind of people are in demand to meet and fit most nicely the conditions of our American life. Who are the men, for instance, preeminently in demand on the hundreds of thousands of American farms? What type of man is most sure to succeed in agriculture, the business upon which mankind must forever depend? The men whom our farms require are not the coarse, the brutal, the cruel, but the friendly, gentle, and humane. Here in a certain town is a farmer of the ruder sort, with his sheep and cattle and horses. With like outward conditions, nearby is the man of the new type. The one, careless and inhuman, abuses his creatures. The other gives his animals the most enlightened, thoughtful, patient care. Is there any doubt which of these two men will succeed? Is there any doubt that the well-tended herd of cows will give more and better milk and pay larger profit? Is there any doubt that the sheep and the young lambs to which their master is a friend will thrive better than the flock of the careless and brutal neighbor? The fact is that in the great realm of agriculture, the demand already is for kindness and humanity. The time has come when no other qualities meet our needs. Suppose again that in one of our cities 2 teamsters, each with a stable full of horses, compete for success. One of these men belongs to the old regime. He seeks to get the most out of his horses and to give them the least. Their food is inadequate, the teams are overloaded, the drivers force and beat the horses. The other man has caught the new ideas about the treatment of creatures. He loves his horses and gladly gives them proper care, plenty of food, air, and light in their stalls, the needed time for rest. He refuses to employ a man who beats his animals. He never overloads his teams. This man does not need to interfere with the business of his neighbor, or try to get away his customers. But which of the two will men, desiring excellent service, choose for permanent employment? As the years go on, which of these men is bound to succeed and prosper? which will certainly get the most work out of the horses. The world is coming to require the best service. The best service cannot be maintained except by men of intelligent humanity. No doubt there is very much to dishearten us in the conduct of business. It is a fair question whether society is not outgrowing our present industrial and commercial system. All that I can show at the present is that the great bulk of commercial transactions is vastly more just and kindly than many suppose. The treacherous, overreaching, disobliging dealer is not wanted anywhere. A righteous competition inevitably pushes him to the wall. Who chooses to deal with men who show a disposition to injure and cheat? Who will purchase more than once from an uncivil salesman? More and more we appreciate and expect just, friendly, humane treatment from those with whom we deal. More and more is the demand in all stores and offices for the faithful, friendly, and cheerful. There is not as yet enough men of this sort to fill the places. Other things being equal, these are the men who surely have the future in their hands. There is every reason to believe that there was never before in the world so large a proportion of such persons as there is now in the business establishments of America. Comparing all times together, there was never a period when the poor man, the little child, or the woman would have been so certain of kindly, just, and respectful treatment in buying and selling as they are in the last decade of the 19th century. One hears loud complaint in many quarters today of the bearing of capital toward labor, of the harsh treatment of working men by their employers. It is not my wish to overlook actual facts, or to make light of evils which certainly need to be righted. On the other hand, I wish to make it obvious that there is another class of facts which is frequently overlooked. There are undoubtedly harsh, despotic, arrogant, overbearing masters of capital. Plenty of barbarism still inheres in the tissue of our civilization. What I claim is that the tyrannical employer is an anomaly in our industrial system. He does not belong there. He makes mischief. Like the ugly teamster, he wastes the power which he is set to direct. Like the farm workman who abuses his animals, his doom is already written and sealed. The law of righteous competition, which always works in the long run to replace the bad thing by a better, and the better thing by a best, works relentlessly against harsh and inhuman masters of industry. Already in a considerable number of mills, factories, shops, and railroads, the new and enlightened kind of employer is in command. Who will assuredly get most work out of the men? Who will save the tremendous losses involved in strikes and lockouts? Who will reduce the human friction? Who will finally pay sure and permanent dividends, so well as that captain of labor who represents not merely money or authority, but also friendliness and intelligent sympathy, who treats workmen not as machines, but as men? Such masters as these are coming into demand everywhere. It is in accordance with human nature that the working people will finally be content with no other leaders than these. By the inexorable laws of trade, the great corporations, granting that they continue to serve us, must furnish this type of captains and leaders. The vast machinery of industry demands the nicest sort of material in timber and steel. The same complex machinery is bound to require also the most excellent human material. The time is already rapidly approaching when coarse, unfriendly, avaricious men cannot be suffered to touch, much less to control, the costly plant of industrial civilization. Let us hasten on to a far plainer but still more impressive and interesting illustration of the working of our law. Only so short a time ago as the first half of this century, schools were generally in the hands of brute force. As horses used to be broken to their work, so it was generally assumed for generations that the will of each child must be broken to discipline. Millions of children grew up with the common sight of the rod in the schoolmaster's hand. Only the few prophetic spirits thought any other method of discipline possible. We have almost totally overturned the old kind of discipline throughout the United States. The coarse, brutal teacher has been obliged by a beneficent competition to disappear in favor of the teacher who is the children's friend. No intellectual superiority, no superb furnishing by the university, is sufficient recommendation for the teacher who does not love his scholars. There are not indeed as yet teachers enough of the higher type which we require. But even inferior teachers must, at least in outward form, correspond to that type. The proof is overwhelmingly evident that the coming race of the world's teachers must be the gentlemen and the gentlewomen whom our ancient prophecy foretold. These alone can secure the best results from our children at the least expense of needless friction. These alone can provide workmen, farmers, artisans, merchants, leaders, and organizers of that industrious, faithful, intelligent, kindly, humane type, such as our growingly delicate, costly, and sensitive civilization requires. We turn to another remarkable illustration of the working of the law which tends to dispossess the bad and the unfit in favor of the better and the capable. It is a direction in which few would look for such an illustration. It is in the realm of diplomacy. The old world diplomacy has notoriously been an open field for fraud, international hate, and corruption. Till our century, the evil name, Machiavellian, had come to characterize all diplomacy. We have been trying in the United States with marvelous success a new experiment. True, we have not always consistently lived up to the ideal of this higher experiment. We have tried also the opposite kind of experiment, and invariably to our grief and shame, as in the case of the Mexican War. But we have already achieved enough to make a clear object lesson of the superiority of the higher method. We have had a series of statesmen who, in their dealings with foreign nations, have ventured to tell the truth, who have not wished to overreach their neighbors, or to do the weakest nation an injustice. The names of Washington, Franklin, Charles Sumner, and Lincoln are proof of the possibility of our having men at the head of our foreign affairs nearly, if not altogether, free of jealousy and suspicion toward the nations over the sea. In other words, friendliness and not aggressiveness has characterized the most successful acts of our American diplomacy. It is in accordance with this spirit that it has now come to be the settled American policy to adjust all those differences over which nations once used to fight by the peaceable method of arbitration. The whole world may be said to be watching our American experiment. Who will deny that the eye of the seer who foresaw the coming of the new race of the humane and peaceable caught sight of the trend of a mighty universal law? Is not his prophecy vindicated already by the fact that the mightiest and leading nation of the world, with its 70 millions of people, exists today almost without an army, except for a few thousand men to patrol the frontiers of the wilderness? We are brought to a more startling and significant witness to the law of the motions of which we are tracing. We have spoken of the armed camps of Europe and of gigantic fleets of war, but even out of the history of war, there is coming into sight a series of suggestive facts of a higher order. The late Civil War in our country, terrible as it was, illustrated on a great scale the growth of humanity. In the old days, the fighters faced each other with hatred. War developed mainly the passions of the savage and the brute. The sole purpose of each contending force was to do mischief to the enemy. In our Civil War, on the contrary, the great leaders, and especially the common soldiers, who best represented the spirit of the victorious party, harbored absolutely no hate in their hearts, wished permanent benefit for their adversaries, and made the motto of war the grand words of their illustrious commander, "Let us have peace." Here was a war, the outcome indeed of the great national crime of slavery, purged away by blood atonement, upon the completion of which the representative men on both sides set to work at once to love and respect one another, and to bind the country together in the bonds of goodwill. Never before in the history of the world had there been such results of war. They were not, indeed, the results of war at all. They came in spite of war. The only possible explanation of these facts is in the line of what we are endeavoring to explain, namely, that in spite of all the unseemly dust and noise on the surface of things, the great ruling inward spiritual forces work together to bring in the rule of the coming friendly and gentle people. Are there not also indications of very marked improvement with respect to the actual holding of power and property? Not so very long ago, the power, and especially the property of the world, were in the hands of the fighters, of the arrogant, of greed and avarice. Vast domains were held by single conquerors. Whole towns were possessed by feudal lords. The poor, even when they were not slaves, were forced to pay tribute to harsh masters. We do not deny that something of this earlier condition of things still holds true. It was not to be expected that the ruder and brutal powers would give way easily or at once. What we call attention to is the extraordinary prevalence already of a new order. An extremely large proportion of the millions of the farms and homesteads of the United States are held in the name of justice, goodwill, and humanity. Making all allowance for masses of ill-gotten wealth, a considerable amount of all the property has been honestly earned. Fair and beneficent equivalent has been paid for it in services rendered. The acquisition of it has not impoverished anyone, but has rather enriched all. Friendly service is not yet the sole condition of the holding of property in the United States, but it is at least coming to be recognized as the only decent and tolerable condition. Let any one count how many persons there are within his acquaintance who have not righteously earned what they possess. Let him enumerate also how large the class is of kindly, industrious, just, and friendly persons who have had at least measurable success in winning possession of the earth. I wish that we might say as much about the power and the places, the rank and the offices of state. But it is possible to exaggerate the extent to which corrupt and mercenary methods prevail in our government. There are in the worst governed cities and states a large number of instances showing promise of the new order. There are upright, faithful, generous, and noble men in every department of the public service. What is more, and this is the point which I wish to emphasize, such men as these are more and more clearly seen to be the only type of men whom the state can afford to sustain. The growing dissatisfaction throughout our country with bad officials and corrupt government is a signal that the days of the self-seeking political managers are numbered. As in industry, in commerce, and education, the demand is for the best, and as only the best can survive, so in politics the same imperative demand for the best is certain sooner or later to produce the corresponding supply. We have seen how in the brute world the creature that has few or ill uses must give way in favor of the creature of many and beneficent uses. So inevitably the politician and the office seeker, who serve only themselves, must go to the wall in favor of the men who offer large services for society. I wish to guard carefully against misunderstanding. I do not speak in order to make anyone better satisfied with existing conditions, least of all satisfied with evil conditions. I am making no defense for the idle rich, or for the too great gains which our American society has allowed shrewd adventurers to win through the corrupting influence of various kinds of selfish or class legislation. I wish to call things by their right names. I wish to leave it perfectly evident how far barbarism still survives in America. I shall speak later with reference to ridding ourselves of the remnants of barbarism. What I have desired to make plain in this chapter is the actual extent of the incoming of the realm of light and goodwill. I hold that the winning forces in the world today are not, as many suppose, greed and selfishness working by brute force, but rather goodwill, friendliness, and humanity. I hold that these forces of civilization, the trade winds of the universe, are mightier than the old world forces with which they compete. They are permanent, while the others are passing away. There are those who, in their discontent at the rate of human progress, suffering, it may be, the effects of injustice, with their eyes fixed on wrongs which need to be redressed, judging human progress by a hasty glance at the waves on the shore, rather than by the mighty rising tide on the scale of the centuries, see no help for the modern world except through catastrophe and revolution. There have always been voices, honest and well meant, but harsh and bitter, foreboding terror and evil to be paid as the price for further advancement. I propose to show the contrary. The great new doctrine of evolution, which comes as a clue to explain so many strange things in our world, does not support these gloomy forebodings. On the contrary, a wide reading both of history and science goes to show how deep is the law that works ever toward the achievement of the best and the most desirable things. Whatever is best, whatever fits the larger need, whatever most nicely adjusts itself to the ruling conditions, this the universe demands and works to effect. Here the highest teaching of religion is one with science and history. If God lives, so sure as justice and beneficence are at the heart of the universe, we have nothing to fear, but all things to hope for. I wish to make this plainer as we go on. End of chapter 2.